Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2022 Green Film Festival of San Francisco. I'm Jason Wolos. I'm one of the programmers here at SF Indie Fest, and you have joined us for the Q&A for the program called The Circle of Life. And we're very fortunate to have filmmakers from around the world with us right now for this Q&A. Hey, filmmakers. Thanks for calling in.
Thank,
First off, congratulations to you. Well done.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's no small feat making a film, let alone making a good one that gets into film festivals. So you did well. Thanks for joining us, and congratulations to you. First off, just an icebreaker, real quick, fast. Your name, your film, and where you're calling in from for our audiences. Ivo, I'll start with you.
Hey, I'm Ivo Provost. I work together with Simona De Nicolai, and we made Hello, Are We in the Show? And I'm calling from Brussels.
Excellent. Thank you. Brian, you're next on my screen.
Yes, I'm Brian Yablonsky. I'm with the Property and Environment Research Center, and Kat and I worked on Elk in Paradise together, and we're in Bozeman, Montana.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, then, Kat, why don't you go next?
Well, as Brian just mentioned, my name is Kat Dwyer, and I am with the Property and Environment Research Center, and we both worked on Elk in Paradise and likewise calling in from Bozeman, Montana.
Excellent. I think we have another Montana person in the house. Yes? No?
Yeah, my name is Olivia Andrus, and my film is Diversified, the Florida Panther Story, and I am also in Bozeman, Montana.
Excellent. Glad to have you here. And last but not least, Johnny, introduce yourself.
Johnny Carroll Sane. The film is To the Bone, and actually, I'm not the filmmaker. I'm just a humble writer and producer. My filmmaker is Andy Sarjahani, who hopefully can join us later on.
Cool. I hope he does, but we're glad you're here.
I'm from Arkansas.
Excellent. Well, cool. So first off, and anyone can answer at any time, why'd you make this film? What was the inspiration? What sparked you?
I'll go first, I guess. So currently I'm a student in the graduate program at Montana State University and in the Science and Natural History filmmaking program. And this was actually my second year film. So I'm a wildlife biologist and a filmmaker, and I learned about a subject called genetic diversity and genetic bottlenecking. And so I just got obsessed with that, and I heard about Florida panthers and their story start to finish of how a genetic bottleneck happened within their genes and what humans did to kind of prevent their extinction. So I just really got obsessed with the story and wanted to tell it, and really inspired by the geneticists that were working on it and the people on the field. So that's how I got started.
Excellent. Who'd like to go next? Ivo?
I'll go.
Oh, go ahead, Johnny.
Okay. Well, like I said, I wrote an essay about killing a deer and cleaning its skull and noticing all the similarities between the deer's skull and a human skull and how really closely we are related, and how it solidified my connection to the place that I live and the place that I hunt. And Andy Sarjahani, the filmmaker, read it, and he's a friend of mine anyway, and he thought it'd make a great film, and so we turned it into a film.
And it does make a great film. Very moving, very poetic. Ivo, how about you? Inspiration.
First of all, I'm not really a filmmaker, but more in the field of contemporary art. I work together with Simona De Nicolai, so we are a duo. And how I started this film was, I think we were depressed and we wanted to take some fresh air and went to walk in the forest here next to Brussels. And then there were some kids feeding animals, birds on a lake. And we just filmed it with our devices.
Yeah.
And the day after we watched the images, and actually what we saw was completely different compared to the moment, how we lived it, because it was like something very nice and a Sunday afternoon scene with these birds. But then when you looked at the images, actually, it looked like a war that was going on. There's different species that were fighting for too much food on a too small area and in a too short lapse of time. And then this misunderstanding of nature became interesting for us. And we thought that animation film would be a good language, because when you make an animation film, you actually have to understand what you are drawing. So it was like not to make an animation film in order to tell something fantastic or a dream world, but to understand better reality.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, we could have many longer conversations than we have time for here, but all your films are inspiring. Who else has a story about the creation, the start of their film?
Well, I'll hop in, and Brian can probably add some more detail to what I'll share. But basically, PERC is a conservation research institute. So part of our mission is to try to find private cooperative solutions to the environmental challenges that are across the country, but also in our community here locally in Bozeman. And one of those challenges is to do with elk and the fact that private lands provide so much of elk's habitat, their winter range, and the cost that imposes on landowners, and sort of the challenge of keeping those large private holdings intact. Bozeman's a growing community, so is the surrounding valley that our story takes place in. And it is a real challenge with the threat of development to keep these private holdings intact. And if we don't keep them intact, then we lose the habitat that's so critical for migratory species like elk. And so that sort of was the inspiration for the film. We produced a report in 2020 with the same name, Elk in Paradise. And then we decided to tell it in a visual way through this film. Brian, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, I was just going to say our backyard here, Olivia's and Kat's and mine, is Yellowstone National Park, and it turns 150 years old this year. And there are about 9 different elk herds that actually call the park home, but those elk migrate out of the park in every direction. As Kat said, a lot of that ends up on private land. And a few years ago, I was down at a migration conference in Jackson Hole, and they were showing the GPS and remote sensing technology to show where all the herds were going. And it became clear that as the herds come out of the park and onto forest land, that they do end up on these private lands. And so many of the discussions that day were about wildlife crossings and what can we do on our public lands. And there was this real shortage of a way to say, if you look at their habitat, they are on private land for such a significant part of the year. And yet there was this dearth of sort of thinking about how do we improve that, or how do we continue that or make that better. And so the film was one way to really push into that space to add value in the conservation of elk.
Yeah. And I'll go over to Olivia, and that's just because there's a lot of about the migration of animals, if you will, and yours as well. And that was enlightening information. I'm kind of interrupting here, but go ahead, Olivia.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, that's a huge problem with Florida panthers as well. That in another film that explained with human encroachment that panthers are dying because of road collisions. That's one of the new factors. And there are bridges that they have within Florida to get within private owned land or protected land from the different forestry departments there, or the fish and wildlife departments. So that is something that they're constantly looking for and building upon to protect the Florida panthers. But for the most part, it is a struggle because it costs a lot of money to do that. It is a little different because they aren't going into private lands as much. They are just crossing the road. So it is pretty dangerous for the animals as well.
Yeah. I think that's a brilliant idea. It's like, why don't we have bridges, road crossings for animals? I mean, when we build a freeway or road, I think its time has come. And I kind of took away from, what was your inspiration for the film? How did it get started?
Oh yeah. So I basically fell in love with genetics and disease and diversity. And I was mostly inspired with looking at my own life and seeing, kind of taking away the story of well, if our genes are telling us to be diverse, like looking into my own life and putting that as my inspiration to say, hey, like these animals literally will die if we don't have diverse genes. And so it's just a different take on human interaction and all of the things that you're constantly hearing about when it comes to conservation, and looking internally and saying, okay, well, those are the things that cause this huge problem within animals if they aren't addressed. So for me, it was just a different side to tell a very similar story.
Yeah, excellent. And then, hey, Andy, thanks for joining us a little bit late, but say hello and what film you're involved with, and what was your inspiration? Andy, can you hear us?
Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm a little late. I was getting off of another Zoom meeting, but happy to be here. My film is To the Bone with Johnny Sane, who's also in this session. And yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, good to have you here. All these films are beautifully made, beautifully shot. You know, and Ivo, you just kind of talked about your inspiration. You're feeling a little blue, a little depressed. Environmental and green films can be challenging. One thing I find as a programmer, I have to watch them during the day. I can't watch them before bedtime, even though they're worthy to watch all the time. So, you know, did making this lift your spirits and provide some sort of inspiration, hope, encouragement?
Yes, of course. So actually, before making the animation film, we started just to film it small with phones, etc. 10 years ago in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
And then we met a biologist, Nico Kudam, who told us to go to the Louvre in Paris and to have a look at the hunts of Maximilian. This is a series of 12 tapestries, very huge ones, 4 meter by 4 meter each, one for each month. And it's actually considered as a documentary, natural documentary, but then in tapestries.
Yeah.
And it gives an enormous amount of exact information about what was going on in this forest, the Sonian forest, 500 years ago.
Fantastic.
And
After
it
you
was,
finished your film, did you feel a little bit more upbeat, uplifted?
well, it's always excited to work on a project, especially when it takes so much time. It was like 10 years to work on this.
Wow.
And because everything is biologically correct, it's so we try to learn a lot, and it was really exciting to work on it. Yes.
Other filmmakers, after you finished and completed your project, inspired, uplifted, hopeful?
I think for mine, I was definitely inspired, but a little less hopeful, just because Dave, the main fish and wildlife conservationist that I interviewed, he stated that due to the numbers, though they have gone up, and it was highly successful with integrating new species from Texas to get new genes within the system, that in the next couple of years, they're going to have to add more, just because it wasn't enough to continue the gene flow throughout the Florida Panthers. So I was a little less uplifted that this has to continue to happen, but it was also nice to see that they're still wanting to push forward and try to prevent the extinction of the Florida Panthers and looking for new ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and almost, I mean, they did prevent the extinction of it, so that was
originally, and they're kind of going in a downslope again. So we're hoping for another. You might see in the next couple of years like a new integration of new cats. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
But Olivia reminded me that. So our worlds connect because I used to chair the Fish and Wildlife Commission in Florida. And so this panther recovery was a story that I had the privilege of working on for 14 years from my past life. And some of the cool stories, there's a river that acts as a barrier to panthers called the Caloosahatchee River that comes out of Lake Okeechobee. And when I was there, one of the female panthers, among the 120 to 230, actually swam across the Caloosahatchee and started to disperse north. And it was the first time we had a female panther dispersing north of the river. Males had done it, but females had not. Until you get a female, you're lacking that breeding capacity. So there were some good news stories that Olivia reminded me of that, yeah, that her film made me a little nostalgic.
Well, then how about your own film, Brian and Kat? Hope for the future with your topic and with Perk?
Yeah, I'll jump in first, Brian. I think it may be sort of a mix of feelings, because it is a daunting task to maintain these corridors and to maintain these private lands. But at the same time, there's a lot of really neat, innovative work happening in the Paradise Valley where the film takes place. One of which we helped implement in partnership with another conservation group and a private landowner. And we're calling it an elk occupancy agreement, but it was a totally privately funded, cooperative, short-term agreement to help essentially create designated elk habitat on this one private holding, about 500 acres for their winter range. And that was just one solution that I think, you know, it's unique to that piece of land, and this idea of an elk occupancy agreement will sort of have to adapt and be uniquely tailored to different properties. But it's a first step, and again, it's private and totally voluntary. And sometimes the government solution is so kind of onerous and permanent that it's not attractive to landowners. So if we can find this more flexible alternative, hopefully it's something that can be duplicated across Montana and across the country.
Yeah.
What do you think, Brian? Are you hopeful after making this
hopeful.
film?
We premiered the film at the Museum of the Rockies here in front of about 250 people. And you have ranchers and conservationists and sportsmen and, you know, managers of wildlife, and they don't always get along or see eye to eye necessarily. But this was one of those really cool reckonings where I think everybody who was a stakeholder in the future of wildlife and elk habitat kind of came together and recognized the role that our cattle ranchers are playing in some of these valleys outside of Yellowstone. And so I think the film has been a platform for cooperation, which has been really heartening, because again, these groups aren't always sitting on the same side of conservation or environmental issues. And this seemed to be one of those issues that brought people together and is unifying moving forward.
I think it's interesting that, especially the migration films, everyone involved in this discussion, you guys are approaching things from a scientific point of view, and like Andy and our film comes from more actually a spiritual point of view. And it's an attempt to wipe away those abstractions that have created a boundary or a barrier between us and wildlife. And, you know, of course, those abstractions have led to very tangible boundaries and barriers and a separation. And I'm encouraged by the work you guys are doing. And what I'm hoping is that the stuff that Andy and I are doing, and hopefully we can do some more, will dovetail in with that and a good creative another perspective, and not look at it as just a simple dollars and cents or even an us and them, but as a we, kind of a Leopoldian attitude toward the ecosystems and the environment, that we're all part of this community. But anyway, just listening to you three talk has encouraged me and inspired me.
Thank you. I wanted to say with your film, I found it really poetic. It hit me in my heart, because that's how I feel when I'm making science films, when I go out and get to experience the amazing wildlife around me. That's the connection I want to show with what the scientists are doing as well. But your film was able to just take that all away and be like, live in that poetic kind of space. And I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, they're a nice group of films together, you know, kind of with one of the underlying themes just being habitat, right? They're all addressing the habitat, whether it's migratory or in a spiritual sense or what other capacity. All your films address it nicely. They're all beautifully shot and beautifully made, by the way, as well. And being a filmmaker, I could geek out and say, how'd you do that? How'd you get that? But for our audiences, I think they're more concerned with the story and the message. You know, what was a challenging, I know for Evo, it was 10 years in learning the technology. What were some of the challenges of making your green film, if you will?
Well, first of all, to find the money, I think.
Well, that's always true with filmmaking. But I mean, as far as like with your collaboration with Mother Nature, with programs or permissions or anything like that.
That was not so difficult, but probably the main position or thing that we wanted to do is to make a film about observing nature without in a language that is not made for that. I mean, animation film, and to not use any kind of personification, and to use the technique of drawing to understand better, and also to learn about the species. Actually, this Sonian forest here next to Brussels is very special because it's a quite huge forest for Belgium. It's a very small country, Belgium. And this huge forest is so close to the city. So there are lots of interactions all the time between human species and all the other species. And it's also interesting with regarding with the tapestries I talked about that are giving us a lot of information about how this wood forest was existing 500 years ago. That you still can recognize actually the topology of the landscape. But now there are high roads traversing this forest, and actually we do have bridges for animals to cross over these highways.
That's great. Olivia was I think you used a lot of found footage. There actually was night.
Yeah, so I was creating this right before the beginning of the pandemic, and so everything got shut down actually, and I wasn't able to use the editing software at my school, so I had to do all of the animation work and everything on my own computer. That almost killed it. So those were some of my challenges, but the found footage was given to me by the trail cams within the park system from the Fish and Wildlife Center. And then I did have some of the images when we were there. I had just finished filming, so we didn't get to see any panthers while we were there because they just lost their vet. So they weren't doing any trapping when I was going in either. So that was another reason for a lot of found footage, or from their footage. But it was great. It was a great learning experience. It was my first time animating anything, which is why I was so impressed with Evo's film, because that is so hard to do and to make it so accurate, like when it comes to the behavior of those birds. It was so impressive. But yeah, those were my challenges.
Were they cooperative, the organizations involved?
Oh yeah, they were 100% down, especially because it was a student film. So they were a lot more cooperative to work with that aspect, since we were learning, and they really wanted to get their project out in a more student-based and inspire more graduate students or wildlife biologists coming into the field to get involved with them.
And Kat, your film, lots of collaboration from the farmers, from Perk.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking one of my fondest memories, that was probably the most challenging part of filming, was a day where we joined the rancher that we featured, Jessica Kinky. We joined her on a cattle drive. And I'm actually originally from San Francisco, so I've only been in Montana for 3 years. So that was quite a change of activity for me. And I think it was like 30 degrees. It was off and on, like drizzling, kind of sleet rain. And we were out there filming for, I think that was like a 6-hour day. We were out there for a long time. And separating, the males from the females and the calves from the mothers, and putting them through the chute and getting them, giving them their shots and weighing them and doing the whole thing. So it was really neat to be like in the pen with the ranchers doing that work and get a really good close firsthand feel for how challenging their career choice has been. I mean, they don't get a day off, and their margin is so slim that you know, the costs imposed by the elk are really meaningful for them, and they love and appreciate the elk, but it's hard to coexist with them. So it was really, I think,
When I started your film, it's like I was on the side of the elk. So, I was on the animal side, and then also it's like, oh, how it affects the farmers. It's got to be a tough life. And then, the elk come and make it even more challenging.
Well,
is,
to put an exclamation point on what Kat said, she was essentially deputized as a ranch hand that day. So she wasn't in there filming per se all the time. She was actually doing the separating of cattle, which was pretty cool to have the team actually partake. Art becomes life. Like art.
Yeah, and it was valuable just to get a sense of to really understand their perspective, because as Brian said, part of our goal with this film was to bring all of the different, sort of stakeholders in this story, bring them together and have them understand each other. And that day of filming and being there and doing their work was a really key part of helping understand the rancher's perspective.
We also, the other thing is elk that migrate, it's a tricky thing because they move. So you got to find the elk when they're moving. And so we had a day of filming early in the pandemic, which was great because there wasn't a lot of traffic going through Paradise Valley, and everybody was quarantining. But we went out with a cinematographer, and he had a drone, and we just found some amazing herds of elk and had this really incredible drone footage following the elk around as they were moving, and the drone was dispersing them. And it was like a whole day's worth of just, I thought, like, we're going to win the Academy Award for this. It's great. And it turned out there was a defect with the S card in the film, and we got none of it except the stuff that, none of the drone footage. We just got the ground footage from that day. And you knew you were never going to get that back. So, I have to just bite my it's a wonderful film, but I thought, oh my gosh, some of that footage had not been lost.
Yeah, it's a beautiful film. Challenges for you guys, Andy?
Here. I would say, we had a pretty clear idea of what we wanted to do when we set out to make it. It was based on Johnny's essay, and I would say that I think we had a very limited amount of time to shoot it, and we shot it in, I guess, 2 days. So I think it was just getting everything in, and within, also, I think we had snow that weekend too, because up higher where I filmed some, there was definitely snow. So I think it was just getting everything in within a 48-hour shoot window. That was probably our biggest.
I think the biggest challenge was whittling that essay down to 6 minutes.
Did you guys know each other before this? I might have missed that.
Yeah, we've worked on one other documentary film.
Johnny was actually a subject in my first documentary years ago about the Buffalo National River and an industrial hog farm that was put in the Buffalo River watershed in Arkansas, where we live.
Yeah. Now, I imagine one of the perks, or one of the benefits, or one of the possible joyous moments is when you're out in nature filming. You might have a great little moment. Were there any favorite filmmaking moments?
It was great. I was, at the time, for me, it was so nice to get back home to the Ozarks and get in the woods and make a film, because at the time I'd been based in New Orleans and was going stir crazy. It was the thick of COVID. So the entire experience, just to get back home and get up in the woods in the Ozarks and make, was nourishing for the soul.
Yeah. Nature is nourishing for the soul, and I think we're finally becoming more appreciative of that, especially with the pandemic, how it seemed like it drove many people back to nature, simpler lives. Other filmmakers, special moments during this creative process?
I think Brian's might have been the story about the drone footage that he told, just getting to see those incredible large herds of elk. And then we lost the footage, so it's bittersweet.
Did your presence scare him away? Was that a challenge? And I imagine with panthers, but I don't know if you actually filmed the panthers. But the animals notice you're there, and
You can get, well, and it really wasn't. We were back pretty far respecting the animals there. And when you have these drones, you can get pretty high and pretty far up and then be able to come in pretty close without disturbing them too much. We did have one where elk were on another side of a tree line, and we kind of snuck up to the tree line. Then we put the drone up and then came up over, and the drone was maybe a little too low, and the elk took off, and it looked like through the viewer, as I was watching with the drone operator, it looked like something out of the Serengeti, where this herd was just hauling across this ranch field. And yeah, that was part of the footage we lost.
How about Olivia?
Yeah, for me, I think I had never filmed in Florida before, so that was super fun to get to see an alligator like 5-10 feet away from me and get that footage. That was really awesome, as well as all of the wetland birds that were around there. But my favorite shot, we would take a buggy to get into their park. And so we were pretty far away and was able to get into the Fish and Wildlife like reserve park. And there was one moment where I saw really far down a doe coming into the field. And then all of a sudden we see a fawn appear, and those sequences, that was even though it was really far away, it was magical, because you could see her trying to get our attention instead of the fawn's attention, and like putting the fawn back into the hiding space. And so that was a really fun moment.
Nice. And what do you hope audiences will take away from your movies? Or what kind of feeling do you hope they'll come away with, if anything? Anyone?
Well, I'll go first.
Sure.
And I think I've already said this, but I'm hoping that when they see our film, that they realize again that there's really not that much difference between us and we are animals. I had this discussion with my granddaughters, and it blew their mind. My oldest granddaughter said, yeah, she said, I'm a cheetah because I'm fast. But no, you're an animal. But I think, again, we lose sight of that, and that causes us to lose connections that are pretty vital to our survival, not only, again, physically, but also spiritually. Like Paul Shepard, great writer and philosopher, he said, that if we were to lose the animals, we'd probably die of loneliness. And so realizing that connection and realizing how important they are to us in every way, that's what I'm hoping people take away from the film.
Yeah, well said. Couldn't agree more. That reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from Mahatma Gandhi. I can't remember exactly, but the spirit of a nation, or the wealth of a nation, is measured by how they treat their animals, or something like that.
Yeah.
Who else? Takeaways, what you hope audiences get from your project, your film?
Well, I'd say, okay,
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I'd say, Aldo Leopold in the mid-1930s wrote that conservation will ultimately boil down to rewarding the private landowner who conserves the public interest. And that marriage of public and private, that we have this public wildlife, but we have habitats that are privately owned, and just us all trying to be thoughtful about how we can incentivize and encourage those who are providing that habitat for our public wildlife to continue knowing that sometimes there's a cost involved there. And so I think folks taking away being sympathetic to the role that ranchers play in this amazing 22 million acre ecosystem we call the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, I think is an awareness that a lot of folks don't, when they see these amazing films about Yellowstone on National Geographic or the Discovery Channel, it's not a story that gets told often, and it's such a critical piece of the puzzle here for this this expansive habitat. It's worth telling.
And I'll just add to that. I think that awareness is so important, especially in light of the growth that we're seeing in a community like Bozeman and the Paradise Valley. There's so much, human population is increasing and development is increasing and encroaching on the private and the public lands. So it's important to be cognizant of the role that these large private holdings play, and to be willing to find a compromise and a cooperative solution that keeps them viable and keeps these public wildlife viable.
Yeah, sorry, that goes into mine as well, because we are looking at, they're talking about human encroachment and all of that, and my film is more like, this is what happens when we don't succeed with human encroachment, we don't address those. And so you'll start to see that with more and more species that you care about, if we don't figure out how to live within the space with animals and start thinking about them. So that's the takeaway that I would also add, is like, we have to figure out ways to live with the wildlife that are around us, or we're going to lose it. And it's so not worth losing. So that's what I hope you take away. Like, these are beautiful animals, all of them, the elk, as well as, you know, just getting out into nature and being able to see a deer in front of you. Like, those experiences you might think are rare, but you can just go out right now, especially in this area, and be with nature, and those moments will go away with as big as we are expanding. So
We take for granted that they're just there and they'll always be there, which they may not if we don't take
Right.
care. Ivo, any takeaways from your film for audiences?
I just wanted to add something to what Olivia just said, that this is actually really these magical encounters you can have with an animal. It can even be a cat or a dog, doesn't matter actually. But this moment when you have eye contact with an animal, and then there's this moment where you recognize each other just as living life. And there is no hierarchy, or there's like just this connection when you look in the eyes of an animal, and you feel that the animal is also just looking into your eyes in the same way. These kinds of moments are incredible. You know.
Agreed. I have magical moments with my cat every day, but I do agree with you. And how about Andy? Anything you hope to have audiences take away?
I mean, I would say, I mean, very similar to what Johnny, I would echo Johnny's sentiment quite a bit. I mean, I think a lot of what we set out to do was just, I mean, I'm a huge fan of, I'm a big reader of Wendell Berry and his work. And, you know, we've just become so accustomed to being separate observers of nature. And, you know, one of the things I admire so much about Johnny and his work and his writing is he really leans into, he's always constantly exploring and evolving as a person and a writer and a creator, exploring that concept of us being a part of this. And so for me, yeah, that was, I would hope that people would, you know, kind of take away that message. And it was good for me too, because after having lived in New Orleans and now being back home in the Ozarks, it's nice to kind of reconnect with that part of myself, and that has been atrophied a bit. And I'm looking forward to making more with Johnny, and this was a great project to really dive in and explore that concept with.
Well, we don't have much more time here. Anything the filmmakers you guys want to say that I didn't address, or last chance to go and add something if you would like, about your film, about your project, about your message? Because all your stories were worth watching, worth telling, in our opinions, here at SF Indie Fest, Green Film Festival. Ivo, you raised your hand.
I just wanted to make some publicity for the Hunts of Maximilian. Please, when you go to Paris, come and visit these incredible work in the Louvre.
I'm going to research that for sure. Yes, thank you.
I think one, you know, Jason, one of the things that dawned on me is all these movies, all these films, these wonderful films, are about people and wildlife and their interactions. And there can be sort of bad results from it, but there can be sort of this cooperative coexistence result too. And how do we manage that relationship between wildlife and people, and pushing through? And some of it can be spiritual, like Johnny talked about. Some of it might be more scientific, like Olivia. Some of it might be animated, like Ivo. But I just thought all these films being tied together with that relationship and how important that relationship is for animals and wildlife going forward. Yeah.
So true. I'd like to end on that, unless someone has something as well to say as that. As well spoken, Brian. Okay, well, thank you to all of you for making these worthwhile films and important movies. Thank you for submitting to SF Green Fest, and congratulations.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Keep up the good fight and stay green.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Ciao.
Bye.